I was on my knees in my parents' living room when my father said it. "We can't do this, Natalie. We need to protect our retirement. You need to accept reality." He said it calmly, practically, as if he were explaining a bad investment, not deciding whether his grandson would live or die. I remember gripping the edge of the coffee table so hard my fingers went numb. I remember my mother standing behind him, silent, eyes lowered. And I remember thinking, in that exact moment, that they knew. They knew Liam only had months left, and they were still saying no. That was the moment everything broke. My name is Natalie Brooks. I was 32 years old then, a middle school science teacher in Madison, Wisconsin, and a single mother to an 8-year-old boy named Liam. Liam was my entire world. He was curious, gentle, obsessed with space documentaries and model rockets. He also had a rare congenital heart condition that had followed us from hospital to hospital since he was a toddler. For years, we survived on surgeries, medications, and hope. But hope has an expiration date. And one afternoon, sitting across from a cardiologist with tired eyes and folded hands, I learned we had reached it. "There is one option left," the doctor said. "An experimental treatment. It could save his life." Then came the number, $85,000. I didn't even flinch at first. I nodded like that number meant something abstract, like it was a statistic in a textbook. But later that night, after Liam fell asleep connected to his oxygen machine, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the paperwork until the numbers blurred. I didn't have $85,000. I didn't even have a fraction of that. What I did have were parents who lived 20 minutes away in a spacious suburban home with 2 cars, paid off mortgages, and a comfortable retirement plan. So I went to them. I brought the medical reports. I brought the timeline. I told them exactly what the doctor said. I told them Liam might have 6 months, maybe less, if we didn't act quickly. My father read everything slowly. Then he set the papers down and folded his hands. "Natalie," he said, "this is heartbreaking, but we don't have that kind of money just lying around." I felt my throat tighten. "I'm not asking for a gift," I said. "I'm asking for a loan. I'll pay you back. I'll get a second job. I'll do anything." He shook his head. "You're barely keeping your head above water as it is. How would you repay us?" My mother finally spoke. "We've already helped so much over the years. Surgeries, medications. We can't risk our future." That was when I sank to the floor. I didn't plan to. My legs just gave out. I grabbed my father's pant leg, sobbing, humiliated, desperate. "Please," I said. "He's your grandson. I'll work nights, weekends. I don't care. I just need time." My father gently pulled his leg back, as if I were crossing a line. "Natalie," he said firmly, "you need to accept reality. Sometimes things are out of our control." Reality. That word echoed in my head as they stood there, unmoving, while I begged on their carpet. They left shortly after. No hugs, no promises, just quiet discomfort. That night, I sat beside Liam's bed and listened to the steady hiss of the oxygen machine. His chest rose unevenly. I brushed his hair back and wondered how grandparents could know their grandchild was dying and still choose caution over compassion. The next weeks were a blur. I called relatives I barely knew. I applied for grants. I started a crowdfunding campaign and shared it everywhere. Teachers from my school donated. Parents of my students sent small amounts with kind notes. After 2 weeks, I had raised $12,000. Liam didn't have time for $12,000. Then, my sister called. "Natalie," she said, breathless with excitement. "Jeff proposed. We're getting married." I congratulated her automatically, my voice hollow. "You won't believe this," she continued. "Mom and Dad are paying for everything. No budget limits. They said I deserve a perfect wedding." I stood in my tiny apartment, surrounded by medical bills, listening to my sister talk about venues, wine tastings, and destination options in California. And something cold settled in my chest. My parents didn't refuse because they didn't have the money. They refused because they chose not to spend it on my son. That was the truth I wasn't ready to face yet. But it was already changing everything. I entered survival mode after that night. There was no dramatic decision, no inspiring speech to myself. I just woke up the next morning and started selling pieces of my life. My laptop, my grandmother's necklace, the old bookshelf Liam used to line up his toy planets on. I opened a crowdfunding page at 2 in the morning, my hands shaking as I typed Liam's story, choosing every word like it might buy us time. I learned quickly how humiliating desperation can be. I called charities and foundations, repeating the same sentences until they sounded rehearsed. Most told me there were waiting lists. Others said Liam didn't meet their criteria. A few promised to review my case and never called back. I took out loans with interest rates I didn't fully understand because I didn't have the energy to calculate what they would cost me later. All I could see was Liam's face. After 3 exhausting weeks, the total on the screen read just over $12,000. I stared at that number for a long time. It felt like watching a clock tick down when you know it's already too late. Liam's world shrank quickly. School became too much. Walking from the couch to the bathroom left him breathless. We moved the oxygen machine closer to his bed, and the steady mechanical hiss became the background noise of our lives. At night, I lay awake listening to it, terrified of what silence might mean. And then there was my sister. Lauren called me one afternoon while I was sitting in a hospital hallway waiting for a test result. Her voice was bright, almost breathless. "They set a date," she said. "Napa Valley. Isn't that perfect?" I leaned my head back against the cold wall. "That sounds beautiful." "It's going to be incredible," she continued. "Mom and Dad said there's no budget. They want everything done right." No budget. That phrase lodged itself in my chest like a stone. From that point on, my life split into 2 parallel realities that never touched. In one, I memorized medication schedules, negotiated with insurance companies, and learned how to read the subtle signs of Liam's exhaustion. I counted pills, I counted dollars, I counted breaths. In the other, my parents toured vineyards, sampled catering menus, and debated floral arrangements. Every phone call turned into an update about the wedding. Imported flowers, a live string quartet, a dress that Lauren described as an absolute dream. One evening, my mother called and spoke carefully, the way people do when they already know the answer might upset you. "Lauren would really love for you to be a bridesmaid," she said. "The dresses are about $300. We need to order soon." $300. I did the math instantly. That was 2 weeks of Liam's heart medication. That was groceries and gas, and part of a medical bill I was pretending didn't exist yet. "I don't think I can afford that," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then my mother sighed. "Natalie, it's your sister's wedding. This isn't the time to make everything about your situation." "My situation?" "I'm not trying to," I said. You're always talking about money," she interrupted. "Lauren deserves to enjoy this without guilt." I hung up and sat in my car for a long time before driving home. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Liam lay in our dim apartment, his small body rising unevenly beneath the blankets, while photos of venue tastings and engagement parties appeared in family group chats. I watched my parents smile in pictures taken at luxury restaurants while I reheated soup for the 3rd night in a row. Once, during a family dinner I barely had the energy to attend, Lauren showed me pictures of her dress on her phone. "It's expensive," she said, lowering her voice, "but Dad said it's worth it." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. No one asked how Liam was doing unless I brought it up first. And when I did, the room always grew uncomfortable, as if I'd introduced something impolite. "Let's not get heavy," someone would say. "Tonight is about celebrating." I learned then that joy in my family had strict boundaries, and my son's suffering crossed them. Late at night, after Liam fell asleep, I scrolled through the crowdfunding page, watching it stall. I reread comments from strangers who cared more than my own parents seemed to. I stared at wedding updates on social media and wondered how the same people could exist in both worlds. I didn't hate my sister. What terrified me was the realization that, to them, my reality was an inconvenience, a shadow that threatened to dim something beautiful. And I was beginning to understand that when forced to choose, they already had. Liam didn't decline all at once. He faded. At first, it was small things. He slept longer. He stopped asking questions about space. He didn't complain anymore, which scared me more than the pain ever did. His body was tired of fighting, even when his spirit still tried. The cardiologist stopped avoiding my eyes. "We've missed the window," he said quietly one afternoon. "At this point, we need to focus on comfort." Comfort. That word felt like surrender. I took unpaid leave from work the same day. I didn't even hesitate. None of it mattered anymore. Bills, rent, credit score, none of it mattered compared to the weight of my son's hand in mine. Our world shrank to hospital rooms and quiet conversations spoken in whispers. Nurses learned Liam's favorite cartoon. One of them brought him a blanket with tiny rockets printed on it. He smiled when he saw it. A weak smile, but real. At night, when the machines hummed and the lights dimmed, he would look at me and ask questions he wasn't supposed to understand yet. "Mom," he whispered once, his voice thin. "Am I going to be okay?" I swallowed and kissed his forehead. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days before my sister's wedding, Liam died. There was no dramatic moment, no last speech. He slipped away quietly just before sunrise, his fingers still curled around mine. For a few seconds, I didn't realize what had happened. I just kept talking to him, telling him about the rocket museum we'd visit someday. Then the nurse touched my shoulder. I don't remember screaming, but I remember the sound in my chest, like something tearing loose. I called my parents later that morning. My voice was hollow, as if it belonged to someone else. "He's gone," I said. "Liam passed away." There was silence on the other end. Then my mother cried softly. My father cleared his throat. "Oh, Natalie," he said. "We're so sorry. We're in the middle of rehearsal preparations, but we'll try to come by." They arrived the next day. They stayed 15 minutes. My father checked his watch twice. My mother kept saying how thin Liam looked, as if this were news. When they left, it was because the florist was waiting, and something about centerpieces needed to be finalized. Lauren didn't come. I began making funeral arrangements alone. I chose the simplest option because it was all I could afford. I borrowed money from my principal, who hugged me longer than my parents had. When I told my family the service would be on Friday, my mother hesitated. "Friday is difficult," she said carefully. "The rehearsal dinner is that evening. Could you move it to Thursday?" For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "You want me to move my son's funeral?" I said slowly. "So it doesn't interfere with the wedding?" "Natalie, please don't make this harder than it already is," she replied. "We're trying to support everyone." Everyone. I hung up without saying goodbye. The funeral happened on Friday as planned. 20 people came. My parents arrived late, dressed like they were heading to a celebration. They stayed for the service, then left immediately after. "Lovely service," my mother said, kissing my cheek. "Very tasteful." Tasteful. That word followed me home like an insult. Afterward, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by sympathy cards and medical bills. The crowdfunding money was gone. The loans were still there. The silence where Liam used to be was unbearable. 2 days later, while my sister walked down the aisle in Napa Valley, I signed paperwork I never thought I would need. Bankruptcy. It felt like erasing the last traces of the life I'd been fighting to keep together, but I was too exhausted to feel shame. I had nothing left to protect. That night, I turned off my phone. I didn't attend the wedding. I didn't send congratulations. I didn't answer messages. I simply stopped. I cut contact with my parents, with my sister, with anyone who could speak about cake tastings and vows while my child lay in the ground. I didn't leave with anger. I left with something colder. A silence so complete it felt like a wall. And behind that wall, I carried my grief alone, knowing that the people who should have stood beside me had chosen not to see what their choices had done. 4 years passed, not gently, not quickly, but deliberately. The first year after Liam's death was not about healing, it was about survival. I woke up every morning with a weight in my chest and went to sleep every night with the same silence beside me. But somewhere between grief and exhaustion, something hardened inside me. Not anger, focus. I went back to school. At first it felt absurd, sitting in lecture halls, listening to discussions about leadership models and institutional reform, while part of me still expected to hear Liam's voice from the next room. But learning gave my mind somewhere to go when my heart had nowhere safe to land. I earned my master's degree in educational leadership while working full-time. Nights were spent reading case studies and writing papers at the same kitchen table where medical bills once piled up. I told myself I wasn't running from the pain. I was building something solid enough to stand on top of it. Then I kept going. A doctorate followed. It wasn't easy. There were moments I nearly quit, moments when the grief resurfaced so sharply I couldn't breathe. But every time I considered stopping, I remembered what it felt like to be powerless. I remembered begging. I remembered being told to accept reality. I refused to accept a small life. By the time I finished my doctorate, doors started opening. I was offered a leadership role at a growing network of private STEM academies in Illinois. Within a year, I became the youngest principal in the organization. 2 years later, I was overseeing multiple campuses. My income changed. My life changed. I moved into a house near Lake Michigan, a place filled with light and quiet mornings. I bought a reliable car. I slept through the night for the first time in years. For the first time since becoming a mother, I felt something close to control. People started asking me to speak, at conferences, at women's leadership panels, at events for single parents trying to rebuild after loss. They called me resilient, inspiring, strong. I learned how to smile when they said it, even though none of them knew the cost of that strength. What they didn't see were the notebooks. I kept them in a drawer in my home office, plain, unremarkable. Inside were dates, numbers, conversations, every refusal, every wedding expense I'd overheard, every moment when help could have changed everything, not to punish, not to relive, but to remember the truth. I never reached out to my family. I didn't need closure from them. I built it myself, brick by brick, achievement by achievement. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped wondering if they missed Liam. I learned that peace sometimes comes from absence. Then, quietly, the balance shifted. I heard about my father's job through a former colleague who recognized my last name at a conference. He spoke casually, unaware he was handing me something fragile. "Bad situation," he said. "Company collapsed. Executives lost everything. Retirement accounts wiped out." I went home that night and searched for myself. The articles were there, the bankruptcy filings, the fraud investigation, the mention of senior leadership who'd failed to exercise due diligence. My father's name appeared more than once. I felt nothing at first, no satisfaction, no joy, just a strange stillness. Over the following months, details surfaced through distant relatives. My parents were struggling. Their house was in danger. The comfortable future they'd protected so fiercely was unraveling. I stood on my balcony one evening, looking out at the water, the sun dipping low over the lake. The life I had now would have been unimaginable to the woman I once was, the woman kneeling on a carpet, begging for mercy. I didn't celebrate their misfortune, but I didn't look away from it either. For the first time, the distance between us wasn't defined by silence or grief. It was defined by contrast. I had risen from the worst moment of my life and built something enduring. They were facing consequences they never thought would reach them. I closed my notebook that night and placed it back in the drawer. I didn't know yet what I would do with the truth I carried, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was no longer powerless, and whatever came next, I would face it standing. My father came to my house without calling. He stood at the gate for several minutes before pressing the bell, as if hoping I might not be home. When I opened the door, he didn't try to smile. He didn't pretend. He looked like a man who had finally run out of options. "We're going to lose the house," he said. "We need $90,000. No apology, no acknowledgement of the past, just the number. I let him speak, about foreclosure notices, about medical insurance lapsing, about how my mother couldn't sleep, and how my sister was doing what she could. Then, inevitably, he used the same sentence he once used on me. "It's just a temporary loan," he said. "We'll pay you back." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I'll meet with all of you," I said. "Once." They came 2 days later. They sat stiffly in my living room, visibly uncomfortable in a space that made something clear without words. I had not only survived, I had surpassed them. The lake shimmered behind me through the glass wall. Silence pressed in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I placed a folder on the table and opened it slowly. "Before we talk about money," I said, "we're going to talk about choices." I laid out the receipts one by one. Venue, catering, dress, entertainment. Total $230,000. Then I slid forward another document. "Here's the estimate for Liam's treatment," I said. $85,000. My mother began to cry immediately. My sister stared at the floor. "You told me you couldn't afford it," I continued. "You told me to accept reality." I leaned forward. "Say it out loud." My father swallowed hard. "We chose the wedding," he said. "We had the money." And what happened because of that choice? I asked. Silence. He died, I said for him, because you chose flowers and champagne over your grandson. That was when I told them the terms. I would give them the $90,000, not as a loan, not as forgiveness, but as a transaction. In exchange, they would sign a legal agreement stating they would never contact me again, in any form, directly or indirectly. No inheritance claims, no family obligations, no future emergencies. And there was one more condition. I told them that I had already prepared a complete documented account of everything that happened, every refusal, every expense, every timeline, and that once the money was transferred, I would release it to extended family and community circles. Not rumors, facts. You don't get to hide behind silence anymore, I said. If you accept the money, the truth goes with it. My sister finally looked up. You're doing this to destroy us. No, I replied. I'm doing this so the truth survives. They argued, they begged. They accused me of cruelty. I waited. In the end, they signed. I handed over the check. They left without looking back. That evening, I sent the file. The response was swift and quiet. Invitations stopped, phone calls dried up. Their names disappeared from places where reputation mattered. They kept the house, but lost the world they'd built around it. Weeks later, my sister showed up alone. You didn't have to go that far, she said. You won. Wasn't that enough? I looked at her steadily. This wasn't about winning, I said. This was about consequences. I closed the door. That night, I stood on my balcony, the lake calm beneath winter lights. I thought about Liam, not with rage, but with certainty. I didn't forgive them. I outgrew them. If you've stayed with this story from beginning to end, thank you. I wish you a peaceful and warm Christmas wherever you're watching from. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories from women who chose strength when silence was easier. Some endings aren't about mercy. They're about truth finally being seen.